In this video, I'm going to be reading through my confirmation document supplied or submitted as part of my PhD. And I'm doing this as a podcast style episode to inform anyone who might be interested on how I'm going about my research and really exactly what my research is about. One thing I find very often about PhDs is they are submitted to assessors and then that's where they stay. Nothing really gets seen or heard outside of the assessors that are essentially looking at whether I am suitable for a doctorate certificate, really, in the end. Whereas I don't want that for my research. I want my research to become a tool for others to help express their queerness, to express their identity, and also I want it to start conversations with other queer artists who may disagree with me or agree with me or want to further what I find. I get asked the question, what is your research about, all the time? And I would like to provide something that I can say, well, go have a listen to this, and you can get a very clear idea as to what it is I'm researching. I want to start this off by saying that I recognize I recognize that my research is insular. I recognize that my research is about me. But there really isn't any other way for it to be. My research needs to be from my lens because it's my perspective on queerness and it's my perspective on how I present that. However, if I can provide a framework or ideas as to how other people could also express their queerness, then I believe that my research has hit the mark. Throughout the podcast, I'm going to have my patch that I'm working on throughout this series playing, and I'm going to, turn a couple of knobs here and there and change what we're hearing. But I thought I might just start with what we have, and then we'll go from there. Queer sonic identity. Developing queer sonic identity through Eurorack Performance. To be queer is to have deviated from the norm, whether in the form of identifying with what Foucault describes as peripheral sexualities, or simply by challenging traditional norms set by societal expectations. Queer identity and electronic music alike have both challenged and expanded normative boundaries. Where queer identities have broadened the scope of what it means to experience kinship, sexuality, gender, and temporality, electronic music, in its technological boundary pushing, has provided a non-traditional medium for musicians to freely push aside normative musical bounds and express one's uninhibited queer identity through sonic identity. Throughout the past decade, significant developments have arisen regarding the scope of sound design and interface tactility. Eurorack is a hardware modular electronic instrumentation format that allows for electronic musicians to plan and build a unique instrument that caters to their specific musical needs. Different combinations of modules within this format enable the musician to explore their musicality through tactility and improvisation. A Eurorack setup can be planned and designed as a bespoke instrument to facilitate multiple modes of simultaneous interaction between the player and the machine. Traditionally, interactions with synthesizers are recognized as performative patching and performing with the synthesizer's knobs and sliders to alter musical parameters attached to timbres, melody, harmony, and rhythm. My interest, in contrast, is exploring interaction outside of normative practice within electronic music performance, with a focus towards non-normative interactions with Eurorack instrumentation that reveal facets of queer experiences. Queer time and temporality, queer kinship, and queer expression will work as a framework for patch composition by utilizing non-performative functions of the human body, like a heartbeat, to be monitored and truncated to work as a variable clock source within a Eurorack system. Human utterances are often regarded as non-musical, will be captured via contact microphones, allowing coughs, groans, and inaudible speech to utilize as sonic texture and envelope following modulation within the synthesizer. Throughout this work, the concept of hybridity, blending queerness with cultural expressions, extends beyond interactions with society and nature to actively subvert normative ideas that have contributed to the alienation of queer identities within late capitalism. Utilizing a post-humanist framework, this research explores possible post-human interactions with queer sonic identity through tactile and non-normative performances with Eurorack. Post-phenomenology will further examine these non-normative Eurorack interactions, particularly its propensity for self-generative collaboration by leveraging emerging technologies within the Eurorack system. I aim to develop a collaborative relationship between the machine and the unspoken and unseen facets of my queer identity. This approach allows Eurorack performance and composition to function as a vehicle for expression and as a co-collaborator in sonifying queerness. Positionality. Queer, like all identities, should be self-selected, not externally applied. Neil Kahn's 2020. This research aims to focus solely on my own experience with queer identity and how my queerness directly affects, correlates with, and infuses my sonic identity. As a male identifying person who describes himself as a homoromantic asexual, it is my place to focus my research into queer sonic identity through a self-experiential lens. Throughout my research, I will be drawing inspiration from and further examining the works and inventions of numerous artists who identify or have been posthumously considered to be identified within the queer spectrum. However, this will always be from a personal lens rather than projecting my own experiences of queer expression onto their creative works. I will always take into account the current and approved names, pronouns, identities, and wishes of the queer people in which I draw inspiration, knowledge, and reference from in my research. However, it is also important to state that through academic referencing, there may be times where dead naming may occur. These names will only be present in the reference list of the document and will not be part of my writing. This goes against my ethos and belief systems and undermines the integrity and safety within a queer space that I aim to embody within my research and practice. Research questions. I will research and develop modes of Eurorack performance that highlight the relationship between one's sonic identity and its interplay with a musician's queerness, and with this I present these sub-questions. A. How does the queer identity of a performer inform their creative and improvisatory decisions? B. How do both performativity and non-performativity and normativity and non-normativity inform Eurorack interactivity? C. When using Eurorack as a primary instrumentation for improvised electronic music performance, what impact does the design and tactile interface have on the expression of both queer and sonic identity? Whilst the research will focus on my individual experience of being queer, I will draw inspiration from influential queer electronic practitioners and how their methods of composition and performance translate into contemporary electronic music performance and production. By conducting soma aesthetic-based research into a series of improvised Eurorack performances, I aim to gain a deeper understanding of the primary question in my research. How does the interplay between the performer and Eurorack synthesizer through tactile and improvisational methods shape the expression of queer sonic identity? I hypothesize that through improvisation and physical tactility with a planned, curated, and practiced Eurorack instrument, both performative and non-performative manifestations of queer identity will shape and inform the sonic output of improvised electronic music performance. This will make use of developments within the Eurorack space that introduce enhanced tactility in conjunction with digital Eurorack expansions that afford musicians intimate and immediate control of granular level sampling that can capture and recontextualize in real time. This research aims to explore the growth and innovation within the Eurorack space from a queer lens and consider how these tools allow for non-normative compositional and performance techniques to be realized. The idiosyncratic interface and design of each module within the curated case will be further investigated to develop workflows, compositional approaches, and ease of interactivity that will develop an ideal Eurorack setup for queer sonic identity. Recount of performance research. In this study, performances utilizing various Eurorack methods have already been recorded and documented for future research. As part of the Welcome to Creative Music Technology at Ian Hanger Recital Hall, I performed the fifth and final installment of my Portrait Patch collection, Portrait Patch 5. The Portrait Patch series documents different aspects of my sonic identity that reflect queer and mental health struggles surrounding OCD, ADHD, and anxiety. By creating a series of patches that developed from entirely self-generative patching, where the act of patching was created throughout a meditative state of flow, and shared via an audiovisual release where the synthesizer was not interacted with physically throughout the performance, I was able to emotionalize through Eurorack the desire for a more controlled inner dialogue and mindset. Through struggling with SCT, sluggish cognitive tempo, early in the Portrait Patch series sees a desire for an ideal self, where a constant inability to maintain a steady internalized tempo leads towards creative works where a patched musical tempo remains uncertain. Portrait Patch 1 develops this idea by a centralized tempo being avoided, allowing for generative, self-clocked pulse generators such as Make Noise Wogglebug, Mannequins Just Friends, and mutable instrument stages, individually providing their randomized and rhythmic tempos. The juxtaposition presented throughout the earlier works of this collection allows for an early insight into how the process of patching can allow for internalized mental health, neurodivergent, and queer struggles to be presented through a sonic identity. As the collection develops, interactivity with the Eurorack interface is integrated, culminating in 3 separate performances of Portrait Patch 5. My hypothesis and research questions have developed most from the improvised Queensland Conservatorium performance. Initially, an entire performance patch had been curated and practiced for the recital. However, 48 hours before the performance, all of the cables from the case were removed, as I felt no sense of personal connection or sonic identification within the patch. From this, a challenge to create a performance patch within 2 hours before my flight to Brisbane was set, with the CMT performance being the first performance of this patch, both in live and practice. Throughout the performance, I was suffering a migraine, a chronic condition that causes a loss of senses such as vision and extreme sensitivities to noise and lights. I believe that this chance event revealed and directed performance decisions that are uniquely individual to this performance. For example, sonic and timbral shifts in performance seen at 4 minutes and 19 seconds were performed haphazardly and are a stark removal from the flowing ambient that I identify with sonically. Towards the latter half of the performance, I found great difficulty visually, where 15-minute mark, I bow my head nearing fainting. It was at this moment an improvisatory decision was made to conclude the performance. When patching on Eurorack, there are often particular knobs that I consider to be no touch or out of bounds for performance. These are usually connected to the tuning of oscillators. However, within this performance, whether a conscious performative decision or by accident, I altered the tuning of the primary sound sources within the patch, devising these pitches in polar opposite directions. However, what was not planned was a unison-like resolve, as the maximum pitch values for each turning knob ended up being perfect octaves apart. In the performance, I allowed for this resolved chord to linger before shutting off the master output of the system entirely, concluding the performance before planned. Where queerness may not have been a deciding or driving factor within the performance of this patch, one's reaction to the trials faced within a high-pressure performative setting may be considered queer. Where musicians facing a performance within a scholarly setting may tirelessly practice and refine what will be presented to a larger academic body, Portrait Patch 5 was unknowingly created and performed, allowing for fluidity and presenting an oppositional stance to a known and desired outcome of performance. In blurring the lines between practice and performance, all preparation was removed and allowed for the exploration and conversation between the instrument and the performer to be explored in real time for everyone to see. The conversations between the person and the machine transpired both verbally and internally, where I, as the performer, would often take steps back from my instrument, actively listen, and then verbally seek directions from the Eurorack system itself. It's through the experience and reviewing the recordings of this performance that the primary research question developed further into seeking a deeper understanding of how queerness influences the following. The impromptu decision to completely reset my performance patch and replace this with a patch that I had no time to develop a relationship or practice with, and to do so within such time pressure and in a high-pressure scholarly situation. The performative and non-performative decision-making behind musical movements that are outside of my own sonic identity. Interactions with the pressures of normative traditional music ideas and whether they were considered or disregarded throughout improvised performance. Eurorack instrumentation. Eurorack is a contemporary format of modular synthesis that has its roots in the 90s as a resolution to the incompatibility between numerous formats of modular synthesizers designed since the 1970s. Before Dieter Doepfer's move to standardize Eurorack in 1994, synthesizer systems such as Butler, Moog, Surge, and EMS worked strictly within the formats of their design. Patch cables and connection points altered across the formats. The rack unit size of the modules altered from 5U to 3U, U referring to the measurement for the height of the rack mount music equipment. Voltage levels, otherwise known as control voltage between these systems, needed attenuating or boosting to be compatible or not cause damage when used interchangeably. This caused an inability to mix and blend the benefits of different formats of modular synthesizers into a curated modular system. Following the standardization, Eurorack became the leading format in modular synthesis and has since developed to accommodate new technologies, such as singular modules programmed and powered by microcomputers that offer an expanding range and customizability with digital synthesis and sampling techniques. In the foreground of Eurorack's performance is wielding audio and control voltage that is being generated into desired musical sounds by an artist whilst performing on the system. Often unexpected changes in sound or randomness in modulation are presented to the performer from within the system itself. It is then up to the performer to capture, alter, and manipulate these moments of spontaneity into creative expression. Queer sonic identity. Throughout this research, queer identity encompasses the fluidity, hybridity, and dynamic expression of oneself that deviates from societal norms. This includes, but is not limited to, sexuality, gender expression, and queer kinship. Sonic identity refers to the unique musical character that a performer develops over time, encompassing elements such as timbre, rhythm, melody, harmony, and texture. It reflects the performer's evolving musicality and the distinct sound that they create, shaped by their experiences and practices, ultimately expressing their individual artistic voice through sound. Queer sonic identity approaches sonic identity from a queer lens, openly and actively questioning normative boundaries of expressing one's musicality by queering modes of musicking, drawing inspiration from Judith Butler's explorations on the act of queering, both resisting and disturbing dominant norms. I aim to develop and demonstrate methods of sonifying queerness to challenge societally established and normative modes of music making, where traditions within the musical hegemony have reinforced practices such as harmony, melody, and compositional structure. The composer/performer can make decisions of queering, which can be further augmented by Eurorack synthesis to disrupt these needed elements of music making. The sonification of queerness should call into question normative modes of music making, allowing for a post-humanist interaction and collaborations with Eurorack instrumentation to subvert expectations of how performance and improvised musicking should be conducted. Jack Halberstam discusses concepts that diverge from conventional knowledge and how these explorations are often encumbered by forms of disciplinary power that seek to uphold tradition. Electronic music provides a platform for expression outside of traditional musical disciplines, consistently welcoming and infusing prospective technologies and compositional approaches into the musical lexicon. Electronic instrumentation makes compositional and performance techniques readily available, such as modulating timbre, amplitude, and temporality, as well as the deconstruction of form, resulting in sound in its infinite malleability to become the material electronic musicians wield and express themselves through. Eurorack instrumentation allows for sound to be presented as deassociated from the natural world and forgoes the need to rely on human limitations. Instead, the machine undergoes curation and conversation to assist in developing musical movements and sonified temporal alterations that extend the conveying of sonic identity far beyond the natural world or human capabilities. Post-human and sonic alterations of natural sounds and integrating these into Eurorack performances can be presented as an act of sonifying queerness by obfuscating and deconstructing familiar and unfamiliar sounds such as speech, field recordings, and human utterances. The performer and audience can be actively challenged through the act of listening to assess the depth of the recording and reveal what identity may be buried within. As a performer, this real-time sonic analysis and improvisatory recontextualization of these sounds can work as queer expressions of sonic texture presented through Eurorack Performance. Further utilizations of non-performative and natural functions of the human body, such as heartbeats and utterances, can be recorded and monitored to work as a sound source or control voltage to modulate musical elements such as tempo and pitch quantization, allowing for non-performative aspects of lived queer experience to actively facilitate adjustments to tonality, timbre, and form within Eurorack Performance. However, it is important to state that the action of using a heartbeat as a variable clock source is the act of queering time structures within musical composition or performance rather than the heartbeat of a queer person being metaphysically queer. As queerness is not an ontological condition, this critique of queerness being attached to one's natural state is also found in Michel Foucault's History of Sexuality, where conveyors of power moved aberrations from momentary acts of expression to an all-encompassing description of that human being. Hence, the natural form of a heartbeat itself is not queer, but utilizing a heartbeat within a musical composition performance as the leading control of time in composition, performance, and practice could be considered queer. The expansion, freezing, and deconstruction of time will be attempted as a form of queering musical structure. This technique looks into the sonification of queer time and temporality. Chrononormativity illuminates a normative preconception of how time is experienced. From this, normative experiences of time have been culturally constructed to enhance power and sexual productivity. Queer people may be aberrant from these constructed normative timelines, and milestones within normative timelines such as reproduction, longevity, and inheritance may not be experienced within queer temporalities. Contemporary electronic instrumentation allows the performer/composer to sonically freeze, capture, and navigate through time. Within the frozen snapshot of time, sounds can be altered to play backwards, slowed down to revealed sonic details, and deconstructed into grains of time that can then be recontextualized into new musical information, thus taking control and making the experience of lost time audible, or as a reclamation of one's temporality. Queer timelines as musical form will inform performance patching. External forces such as disease, violence, and inaccessibility to normative temporal beats have given way for alternative temporalities to emerge. Within the musical works of my research, I seek to sonify this by establishing musical works that focus numerous instruments and effects to be clocked by a central pulse, giving all sound sources within the Eurorack system a cyclical, repetitive, and unperturbed feeling. The audience will have time and space to feel comfortable within that repetition, but after some time, the composer, performer, removes each element individually from the central clock source, causing each sonic element to rubato from the locked tempo, sonically resulting in rigidity, dissonance, and temporal disruption. When the process of removing the clocks is complete, the performer, composer, and audience should sit in the comfortable temporal unrest. The listener should remain in that space until the sound coalesces into a settled yet queer, unclocked version of the original clocked composition, sonifying the beauty and challenges that can come from being forced to experience time outside of rigidity and normative temporality. Developments with Eurorack technologies have afforded new modes of capturing and manipulating sonic material within a planned system. My honours paper, Something in the Sample, explores and expands upon intimate sampling techniques through contemporary and redundant technologies. Within these findings, I combine methods of recording and composition from French composer Luc Ferrari with the hauntological influence of analog mediums within digital spaces. A. Luc Ferrari's Object Jouvert allows for chance and serendipity to dictate the sonic material that would be recorded and utilized within his musical works. Through this capturing of spontaneity and chance moments on tape, Ferrari was able to capture sounds that were not prefabricated and contained a certain non-performativity of utterances and speech that occur within daily conversation. The recording and capturing of these samples or conversations was considered to be an act of creativity. B. Anecdotal music and autobiographical music methods by Luc Ferrari allude to the possibility of recordings, particularly of the human voice, to contain the identity of the subject. In an example discussed within Luc Ferrari, an interview with an intimate iconoclast, Ferrari elucidates to the sonic voyeurism and non-performative recordings of the human voice. Within his process, the displacement of recorded voice from ordinary places into the intimate and deep listening afforded by the studio allows for a deeper understanding of emotion and the identity of the subject to be revealed. Ferrari's provocations, similar to those of Monique Wittig, consider speaking to be a full representation of oneself from internalized identity through to genitalia. The distinguishable timbral qualities of voice can generate recognition. It helps make discernible cultural influence and the lived experience of the person speaking. The timbre is a key idiosyncratic factor in the listener's relationship to a sound source. My research will explore not only the queering of one's natural voice to fit self-applied queer identities, but also the unique timbral qualities of not only the performative speaking voice, but also the non-performative. Vocal utterances as an expression of queer sonic identity by utilizing vocal utterances as malleable sonic material through and modulation through vocal utterances and expression of queer sonic identity by utilizing vocal utterances as malleable sonic material and modulation source through Eurorack modular patching and performance. Through Eurorack sound shaping devices such as filter, modulation sources and effects, the voice can be altered to create a new shape and tone. This can be completed through numerous sound design techniques that further intertwine the human and the machine, such as wavetable synthesis, granulization, and pushing the capabilities of human voice far beyond. Consequently, inclusive in this research, the definition of voice will expand to include the recognizability in one's creative sonic identity, developing and presented via praxis and performance. The revoicing of the human and the development of queer voice via Eurorack technologies may reveal methods of sonifying queerness. Finally, I wanted to say thank you again for making it this far, and I hope that you join me on all of the journeys that will come over the next 12 months, with the hopes that my PhD is submitted by the end of February of 2026. It's all gone very quickly. So, all right. Thank you very much.